On the 9th of August 1956, a few hundred people entered the Student Union Lounge at the University of Illinois for a performance. This large crowd would be the first ever in human history to watch a live performance of music composed entirely by a computer.
New opportunities for artists.
Is art on the way out?
Artists across the music industry use AI in an assistive way.
Was that thing written by a computer? I see. The relays write the music. They feed it into this white cheese box here, whatever that is.
Music labels are saying AI music generators are a direct threat to the industry.
TikToker called ghostwriter 977.
Much like everyone else with access to the internet, the mainstream AI revolution over the last few years has sparked me with just as much intrigue as it has existential dread. Trust human beings to build themselves machines that could take all the boring jobs, but instead take over all the jobs that we would actually like to be doing, like making art, poetry, and music. But what if I told you that the history of AI in music didn't begin with Joe Biden singing Ice Spice songs? And actually, it's been around for over half a century. The AI music revolution already happened. We're just watching the next step in its development. But what's the actual deal here? I mean, are we likely to see modern musicians obsolete in the next decade? Are AI models bound to steal from us the most precious gift we as humans were given? That is, the gift of making sick beats? Well, to find out, let's go all the way back to the start of this video. The Illiac 1 was the first computer built and owned entirely by an American educational institution. Like most computers at the time, it was a big boy. It was mainly used for doing nerd stuff, like calculating the orbit of satellites. But then one day, a chemistry professor at the university, Lejeune Hiller, saw the hulking device and said, "Dude, this thing should write bangers." Hiller and some fellow associates at the university began programming the computer to be able to spit out musical compositions. This amalgamated into what the team called the Illiac Suite, a 4-part composition widely considered to be the first music composed by a computer. And it was kinda meh.
I'm feeling a light 0 on this.
But for the time, this was huge. Hiller became famous overnight, and in an article published the day after the performance, the feedback mostly echoed the statement, "It does away with the need for human composers." This concern would be repeated still to this day as we try to navigate the implications surrounding AI-generated art. But Hiller's breakthrough was revolutionary, and it laid the groundwork for the next few decades in computer-generated music. There were a few other developments in the years following Hiller's Illiac. One of the most notable being the computer program written by 17-year-old, yes that's right, 17-year-old Ray Kurzweil. He debuted his invention on a television program called I've Got a Secret, a show in which contestants had a secret that needed to be guessed by a panel. He performed a composition on piano, then one of the panelists had to guess his secret, which was of course that the music he just played was written by a computer.
Henry? Was that thing written by a computer? Yeah.
What was unique about his invention, however, was that it didn't just spit out random compositions. It had the ability to register patterns in other pieces of music, meaning it could almost emulate the styles of other composers. This would prove to be a huge part of AI music in the future, as we saw the shift from systems that could simply create compositions to systems that had knowledge-based understanding of music, and eventually could create music that you couldn't tell from a real human beings. Enter David Cope. David Cope is kind of the godfather of AI music composition. As a musician himself, he held the belief that anyone who had ever written music, or for that matter, created any kind of art, is almost always drawing from inspirations and influences that they find in other artists. Every artist is just a combination of all those who came before them. And therefore, all music is essentially inspired plagiarism. This led him to the realization that if you can train a human to create compositions based on other music, why couldn't you do the same with a computer? He wanted a machine that could essentially cure his writer's block, a system that understood a composer's musical characteristics and knew how to write in their style, sometimes even better than them. In 1981, Cope created Emmy. Being that he didn't have too many of his own compositions to feed it yet, he started giving it compositions of other classical composers, mainly Bach. As the story goes, one day while testing the machine, Cope pushed a button, walked out to get a sandwich, and returned to find that his creation had produced 5,000 original pieces in the style of Bach. But how did this thing actually work? Well, it worked on a concept that Cope called recombinancy. Basically, it's a 3-step process. Step 1. Feed the algorithm with a few sheets of music. It'll then deconstruct those pieces into separate parts, analyzing each of them in the process. Step 2. The algorithm then finds commonality in each piece, Due to its musical training, it can identify the characteristics and stylistic choices throughout it. Step 3. Recombinancy. It'll then take those characteristics and glue them all back together into an entirely new piece. In 1993, Cope released an album titled Buck by Design, where he used EMI to generate the compositions. He struggled to find any musicians who wanted to play the compositions for the recording, due to the fact that they were kind of difficult for a human to play. So on the original recording, the pieces are played by a disclavier piano, which is basically a piano that can play itself if you program the composition. This makes Buck by Design the first album ever released that was not written nor played by a human being. The response was intense. Professor Douglas Hofstadter stated, "EMI forces us to look at great works of art and wonder where they came from and how deep they really are." And in case this all wasn't depressing enough, they decided to subject the compositions to what's known as a Turing test. Developed by Alan Turing in 1950, the Turing test is an experiment of a machine's ability to exhibit intelligent behavior equivalent to or indistinguishable from that of a human. Basically, they gathered an audience and played 3 compositions, one written by Bach, one written by EMI, and one written by Dr. Steve Larson, a music professor at the University of Oregon. I'm sure you can see where this is going. The piece that the audience believed was Bach was actually EMI. The piece that was Dr. Larson's was believed to be made by a computer. In defeat, Dr. Larson stated, "Bach is absolutely one of my favorite composers. My admiration for his music is deep and cosmic. That people could be duped by a computer program was very disconcerting." In the following years, EMI dropped a few more albums, all of which followed the styles of a wide range of classical composers. Like all great musicians, the time came for EMI to die. Cope was ready to move on to newer projects, so he saved 5,000 of EMI's Bach-style compositions and turned her off for the last time.
Will you stop, Dave?
You can find the 5,000 compositions as MIDI files on his website. His next venture was building from what he accomplished with EMI, and in the 2000s he created Emily Howe. Emily Howe is what Cope imagines as EMI's daughter. He understood that as amazing as EMI was, it couldn't create its own style of music. It was simply a copycat. With Emily Howe, this all changed. This new algorithm, trained on a massive database of classical music, could create its own pieces and receive feedback, which it would use to make changes for future pieces. Basically, when it created a piece, you could be like, "No, bad computer, do better." And it'd be like, beep boop, beep boop. Now there's a whole bunch of theory behind how this system works. God knows I don't understand it. But basically, Cope finally created a machine that was able to write its own style of music. And at this point, things really started getting real. Work off the back of Cope's discoveries continued into the 2010s. One of the more notable models includes Melomic's Lammas project. This one's interesting because it's kind of argued that Lammas created the first completely original AI composition in its own style, since Emily Howe and other systems were sort of trained on a database of other composers. Either way, it showed that AI was now getting smart enough to create music in its own style. It's around this time that AI technology started seeping into mainstream markets. We saw the introduction of AI into the music production space. AI started to write pop songs. For example, the team at Sony CSL developed an AI taught on Beatles songs, which wrote one in their style. But it's important that we make a distinction here. Up until this point, most musical AI was primarily concerned with generating compositions, which would then need to either be played by a human or by a MIDI software instrument. But it was in the 2010s where we really started to see this change with the advancement of AI synthesized sound. In 2016, Google launched an open source project called Magenta. One of Magenta's biggest developments was their NSynth, a synthesizer which creates sounds based on machine learning. Essentially, you can play at the sound of an instrument and it can deconstruct and reconstruct that sound to synthesize a new one. It's trained on a database of 300,000 notes from 1,000 different instruments. And whilst it doesn't always sound perfect, technology like this has already started to find its way into digital synthesizer plugins and hardware. But this opens the door for something spectacular, because if you can use AI to generate single notes, why not use it to generate an entire song? OpenAI, the company behind the fastest growing app of all time, ChatGPT, and the company whose CEO owns a doomsday shelter to protect him from the world ending at the hands of his own invention. No one's gonna raise an eyebrow at that, huh? We're all just cool with that thought? Okay then. They developed OpenAI's Jukebox. Jukebox uses convolutional neural networks, also called CNNs, which are algorithms that can analyze an input image and mathematically represent its unique features. But audio is audio, right? It's not an image. Wrong. Audio can be represented in detail using tools like spectrograms, which systems like Jukebox and even Magenta's NSYNC then use to recreate the sound themselves. It's not actually that far from David Cope's method of generative machine learning. All it does is detect patterns and put them back together in a new way. OpenAI's Jukebox can generate full songs from scratch based on existing music. It's trained on 1.2 million songs and tracks the metadata so it can differentiate between artists and genre. They have a whole bunch of songs up on their SoundCloud, and the results are interesting.
So grab your bathrobe and meet me by the door.
It's far from matching the quality of a real recording, but it's also not terribly far off. However, there are some limitations. For starters, it struggles to speak in proper language. Because it's working off an amalgamation of other songs, it can't really form proper words. Also, unlike many of the AI image creators, it can't rapidly fire a bunch of new generations for you every 10 seconds. They take hours to create. OpenAI has gone pretty silent on this project for some time, at least from what I can tell. My guess is that it wasn't useful enough for the general consumer yet, so they focused their efforts on more viable projects. Google released Music LM, an AI which can synthesize music based on text prompts. It's impressive. You can specify genre and instrumentation. You can tell it to score an environment or scene. They even have this part on their website demo where they copy descriptions of popular paintings, and the results aren't terrible. Slight prediction here. I could really see this sort of thing replacing stock music libraries in the future. One of the biggest pains with these libraries is having to search through pages of songs just to find one that'll fit your content. If you had an algorithm that could generate exactly what you described to it, it just makes sense to use that instead. Much like any good technological advancement, the average person doesn't necessarily care about the marvel of science that may be involved in its existence, but rather, how can we make this funny?
Everybody was trying to be like, oh, she had one hit one day, but it's like, now what? 2 hit wonder? Like, the fuck?
In early 2023, a viral TikTok was spread of an AI Drake voice rapping the lyrics of Ice Spice's hit single Munch, and Drake and his record label Universal Music were very mad about it. Drake put out a statement on Instagram where he threatened, "This is the final straw, AI," which, yeah, you really don't help yourself, do you? Not long after that, an anonymous TikTok account by the name of ghostwriter 977 uploaded a song titled Heart on My Sleeve, an original song featuring the AI voices of Drake and The Weeknd. The song racked up 600,000 streams on Spotify and 275,000 on YouTube, not to mention the 15 million views on TikTok. Like most record labels, Universal Music hated the idea of someone else making money off of their no work, so they got it banned. "Job well done," said Drake and the gang as they thought they had put an end to this chaos. Little did they know, this was the beginning of something huge. For a while now, the internet has been flourishing with these AI voice covers. Singers covering rap songs,
living in a gangster's paradise.
presidents covering rock songs.
The angel from my nightmare.
The limits are truly endless with this kind of technology. A whole bunch of other producers started making original AI rap songs, a fair few using the AI Drake voice. But some have decided to kick out the middleman and use AI to generate a brand new voice. This is Nunuri. She's a fashion model, activist, pop star, and vegan living in Paris. Like the rest of France, she's also not real. She originally started as a digital avatar created by Georges Zuber. She had a successful few years as an online influencer before being signed to Warner Music, who used an AI voice to bring her pop star career to life. Now, it's easy to see where the appeal was for the record label. Finally, they have control over an artist who won't age, won't get tired, won't demand more royalties, plus she'll always stay in shape because her meals are bite-sized. She released her first song in September of 2023, Dominoes. Unfortunately, I can't play this song due to copyright, so allow me to pull from the comments of the video to give you an idea of its quality. You have a hidden talent. I feel like this single-handedly answers my question to will AI ever replace artists? This slaps. And of course, this goes hard. Honestly though, the song just sounds like every other generic pop song you've ever heard. Personally, I think the lyrics are a bit too reminiscent of an AI plot for world domination. Either way, Nanuri is the first digital character performing AI-generated music to land a record deal, showing that the mainstream record industry cares much less for the nurturing of music culture as they do for propping up novel ideas that go nowhere. But examples like this show us how AI is starting to infiltrate the mainstream music industry. Even ghostwriter 977 has reportedly been involved with several industry figures. He's also submitted Heart on My Sleeve for Best Rap Song and Song of the Year at the next Grammy Awards. He's eligible to win both awards as they're given to the writer of the song and not the performer. So, as someone who's been looking into this for all of 3 weeks, I feel fully qualified to make predictions for what's to come. As I mentioned earlier, once AI like Google's Music LM get a bit more fleshed out and are a bit better suited for professional markets, it'll eventually render stock music libraries pretty useless. I think it will eventually get to a point where you can score some films, even though your higher budget blockbusters will still use your Zimmers and your Ludwigs, but these films may become the exception. As for when the technology gets to this point, who really knows? In the meantime, I think we'll see AI usage in assistance of human-created music rather than replacing it entirely. Systems like what David Cope originally imagined, AI that can help cure writer's block by assisting in writing melodies and harmonies. Google's Magenta team has already made strides into this area with Music VAE, an AI that can flesh out melodies, harmonies, and drum patterns based on a single musical idea. Other tools are being developed to help lower the musical skill ceiling, allowing less trained or potentially untrained musicians the ability to create music without, putting in the effort to figure out what the hell this is. One example of this is Google DeepMind's new AI tool, which basically lets you hum a melody and then convert it into an instrument of your choice, among other things. Another good example of this is Magenta's Piano Genie, a controller that maps 8 buttons to the full 88 keys of a keyboard, allowing the player to set the rhythm and pace of the notes while the AI does all the hard work deciding which notes make sense. The demos for this are cool, but the guy playing it mashes the keys like he's playing a competitive Street Fighter tournament. Will we see more AI pop stars popping to the top of the pop charts anytime soon? Personally, I kinda doubt it. Beyond the novelty of it, the music just isn't all that compelling. A lot of pop music relies on the artist more than the artist's music, and if that artist is a soulless amalgamation of ones and zeros, it's hard to attach a brand to it. That's not to say that we haven't had bands consisting of made-up characters before. I'd just argue that the difference is that their music is, well, good. It's also not to say that an AI pop star could never have a following rivaling that of a real one. I just think it'll be a long time before this sort of thing is viewed as anything short of a gimmick. As for the AI voices, it's hard to tell where it'll go. I think it'll become more common for the labels to start introducing clauses into record deals where the label will own the rights to the artist's voice likeness or something like that. And while I doubt they'll use AI to replace the real Drake in the studio anytime soon, I can see them use this technology for marketing prospects. Combined with deepfake technology, you could theoretically film an ad in another country using a body double, using AI to recreate their face and voice, inserting them into the ad without the artist having to lift a finger. In some of the more don't read the fine print kind of record deals, the labels could get away with this without having to pay the artist at all, so long as the label owns the rights to use their voice and face in commercial content. A good example of this working in favor of artists is Google's partnership with YouTube to create Dream Track. It's a new tool for YouTube Shorts that allows you to create a song using text-based prompts using the voice of a select handful of pop artists. These artists help develop the software and are licensing their voices, meaning they receive royalties whenever their voice is used in a generation. The one thing I am sure of, we're going to see a lot more lawsuits. Whenever creative technologies like this emerge, there's a scramble of lawsuits that try to pin down how the industry should deal with them. It happened with sampling, it happened with the internet, and it'll happen with AI. Best case scenario, these lawsuits set a precedent that doesn't try to reject AI so much as it does integrate it into the current music landscape. Worst case scenario, the record labels refuse to accept the new technology, and we're left with this sort of awkward standoff where no one really wins, much like when Napster shattered the industry in the late 90s. Either way, AI will continue to force us to question our relationship with music and copyright in general. There's a misconception about creativity. We humans treat it as if it's some divine gift that some of us are just blessed enough to have pouring from our souls. I think what the AI music phenomenon shows us is that this is wrong. Music, at the end of the day, is just patterns. As much as we would love to believe it's some magical force, it's simply not. It's just math and science. Now, this doesn't need to be as bleak as some are making it out to be. Sure, it's worrying that one of our most celebrated inventions now lies in the hands of machines, but I truly don't think they'll ever replace us entirely. There's always going to be a need for human music, because humans are the only thing that understand what it's like to be human. And isn't that what music's all about? Understanding and exploring the human experience? So even if we see a top 100 chart full of robots in the next few decades, one thing's for sure. There will always be some dickhead playing Wonderwall at a house party. Thanks so much for watching. There was a lot to cover that I probably missed in this video, so if there's anything that I forgot to include, let me know in the comments. I got more videos lined up for the future, so subscribe if you want to stick around. Now, I would love to keep talking to you, but I'm gonna go wait in my bunker for this all to blow over.